Welcome to the 14th episode of my series of video articles on how to write short stories. In this video article, we're going to talk about the minimum viable hero's journey. Now, the hero's journey as a story model is derived from the work of Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. It's important to note that The Hero with a Thousand Faces isn't a book about a story model called The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell was a comparative mythologist. He wasn't a story guru or a story analyst. And what he spent several years doing was looking through myths, folklore, stories from around the world, from different cultures, and finding elements that were consistent across different cultures, mythic and archetypal things that the heroes did. And that's why he called his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, because it distilled all that down into steps that could be found in tales across the world, ranging from Greek myths to ancient Babylonian tales, and so on. In terms of and by the way, Campbell referred to that as the monomyth, not as the hero's journey. The term that we now use, or the model that we call the hero's journey, was based on a guy called Chris Vogler and how he distilled Campbell's work specifically for storytelling purposes. And Vogler was, I'm not sure if he still is. He's in his early 70s now. He may have retired, but he was a film consultant for many years at Disney, and he worked for other film studios too. And he also has worked as a teacher and gone around the world with his writer's journey workshops. But I don't know if he still works in screenwriting and film. But initially, his applications of Campbell were to enable film studios to quickly identify what might be wrong with a particular screenplay that they were considering, and give them a set of analytical tools. And he wrote a 7-page memo, which you can get on his website. We'll talk about his website in a moment. And that 7-page memo went all around Hollywood like wildfire in the 80s. Chris distills Campbell's work down to 12 steps. I'll very briefly name those 12 steps. This video is not about the 12 steps of Chris Vogler's hero's journey. The 12 steps, though, are the ordinary world. This is the world that the hero inhabits before he goes on his adventures. The call to adventure. This is a bit like the inciting incident. It's where the hero receives a call to say this needs to be done to save the world or to solve the problem that has cropped up. Refusal of the call is where the hero goes, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Maybe I won't go on that. But then the hero gets the call again, and they do go on the adventure. Meeting with the mentor. There's often a figure, wise old man, wise old woman, who serves as a mentor and helps equip the hero with knowledge or objects of power to help them through the adventures that they're about to go on. Crossing the first threshold. This is a distinct story stage where the hero leaves the ordinary world and goes into the special world of the story. Tests allies and enemies. This can be quite a long phase, or in some stories it's shorter, where the hero gets tested, he finds allies, he also makes enemies, and these tests help the hero grow, gain knowledge, gain confidence, so that when he goes to the next phases, he's equipped to deal with what he's about to face. The 7th step is approach to the inmost cave, and that is the hero moving towards the supreme ordeal, which is usually a life or death ordeal. That's the 8th step. Then the hero, if he survives the supreme ordeal, he gets the reward. Chris Vogler sometimes calls it seizing the sword. And then there's the road back, which is leaving the special world and going back towards the ordinary world. There's often a second life or death ordeal, which Chris Vogler terms as the resurrection, and then the final stage, which is often missing from a lot of contemporary movies that use this kind of model to help structure their story spines. And this stage is Return with the Elixir, when the hero goes back to his tribe or his people and shares the knowledge of what he's learned so that society can benefit from his trials and tribulations, and the pool of communal knowledge can grow. The obvious story that follows these stages, and there is interviews with George Lucas saying that he very much had this in mind, is the first Star Wars story, and I'm saying first in terms of when it was released. I'm talking about Star Wars 4, A New Hope, but there are plenty of stories that you can read this model into it. Before we move forward, just a quick couple of caveats. One of them is this is a set of guidelines. It's not a blueprint that you have to follow rigidly. Vogler himself is very much on record as saying it's a set of guidelines. I like to think of it as each stage for storytellers is like a series of those ink blot tests that psychologists sometimes use. I forget the name. It's like Rorschach or something like that, and where the psychologist shows you an ink blot, and the story or the image that you make of that ink blot tells the psychologist something about your internal state and what you're thinking about, and if you've got psychological issues, what those issues might be. So I like to think of each of those as a separate one of these, so that someone so for example, the Supreme Ordeal, which is a life or death, but it's not necessarily a physical life or death. It could be life or death, life and death of dreams, or so like a romance author, their Supreme Ordeal might be a moment where one of the pair of lovers thinks the other one has cheated on them, and there's a potential for them to break up, and maybe then they'll the lover who thinks they've been cheated will, in the resurrection stage, find out that they misinterpreted the information they were given, and then so in the Supreme Ordeal, the life or death struggle is the life or death of their potential romance, and then in the resurrection stage, it's resurrected. But whereas, say, a Supreme Ordeal for a horror author, maybe their protagonist faces some kind of supernatural monster that he either has to kill or banish back to their supernatural realms or something like that. So these stages are very different depending on what kind of stories you're telling, and very different for individual authors. So they're not rigid, set in stone blueprints. So that's a caveat that we need to make before we move on. So let's talk about the minimum viable hero's journey. So Chris Vogler does have a thing called the Chris Vogler's Writer's Journey blog. You can find it by Googling it. I'll put the link to this article in the description of this video. But this article goes back to 2011. I don't think there's been an entry since 2023. And it's a shame, because I think Chris Vogler is a really articulate communicator, and I'd love to see more content from him. But hey ho, we can only work with what we've got. So this blog post, which this video article is based on, he starts off calling it Hero's Journey Short Form. And Chris says, I just got an email from a graduate student wondering how the 12-stage outline of the hero's journey I describe in the writer's journey might be shortened for commercials or short-form web content. The question about a streamlined version of the narrative comes up often in regard to short films as well as web content and games. I'm of the opinion that we have so many ways of communicating the stage of the human journey in shorthand images, and the audience is so quick at picking them up that we really don't need to omit anything, but I can see the value of stripping the experience down to its absolute essence. So here is the most streamlined version aimed at preserving the essential experience of the hero's journey, some suspense about the outcome, and some challenge and growth for the hero. So that's how he started his blog post. These are the 5 steps that Chris suggested to form a truncated, or he called it minimum viable narrative experience. I think narrative experience is a redundant phrase, and I've replaced it with minimum viable hero's journey. If by any chance you watch this, Chris, I apologize for that. Anyway, the 5 steps are an implied ordinary world, an efficient call to adventure to set the stakes of the story, a distinct threshold crossing, remember, moving from the ordinary world to the special world of the story, a death and rebirth ordeal or a resurrection, and a reward or a return with the elixir. So those are the 5 steps that Chris recommends. Here's what he said. In reality, almost always the other pieces or stages are either implied or present in truncated form, and the audience will labour mightily to fill in any blanks that you leave. For example, the audience will fill in a wild night of partying if you just show a teenager sneaking into the house at 4 in the morning. Hope that clarifies. The ancient world believed firmly that a single image, a statue, or a vase painting could convey the whole drama of a great story. So we can take that as permission to cut this sucker to the bone. So that's what Chris has to say about the story. In terms of as writers, and I'll talk about this in an upcoming in the next video, but we have to use compression to use the hero's journey in short form story. Remember a couple of slides back on the quote, Chris said it could be used for short films. To me, that is the same as short stories. So in the next episode, in this series, we're going to look at the individual sections of the minimum viable hero's journey in more detail. And after that, I'm going to, in subsequent videos, I'm going to analyze some stories using this structure, see if it holds up. And then if it does, I'll do something like I did in the previous video in this series, where I used Dan Wells's 7-point story structure to actually outline a story and see if I can outline some stories and see how it works using the minimum viable hero's journey to do that. Now this video is shorter than some of my previous ones. When I started out, this is the 22nd video I think I've done. I wanted to do kind of like 10 to 12 minute videos. Some of the ones I've done recently have stretched longer, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and I'm sure there'll be ones of that length in future. But I'm trying to keep these videos short and respect your time and your attention. If you've got any questions on this, you can email me at paul@deliberate-practice.com and I will get back to you. And if you're a frustrated or aspiring fiction writer, I've got a resource called the writing-vault.com you might be interested in. I'll put the link to that in this description as well. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next article when we look at those 5 individual sections of the minimum viable hero's journey in some more detail, and we'll also talk about how you can do some of the narrative and story compression to let the audience, give the audience enough detail so that they can fill in detail for themselves.